So today I have something new for you guys. Ever since I discovered that within the lore of 40k there was, by an astonishing coincidence, a planet titled the LUETIN Necropolis, I was obviously ravenous to find out as much information as possible. However, much to my dismay, I found that there was barely any information. The LUETIN Necropolis, strangely, is a planet referred to only in a short battle audio drama. This was incidentally published back in 2012, before I started to even cover 40k here on the channel, so I think there's nothing more to this than an astonishing coincidence. But that even more strangely, in Deathwolf, which is the audio drama, it references the LUETIN Imperial Guard Regiment of the 109th. Yeah, the 09 is bonkers. How do these kind of things happen? By chance, I cannot fathom. Deathwolf describes an encounter between the Space Wolves and the Dark Eldar. You can of course pick this up still from the Black Library should you wish to listen to it. I've linked that in the notes down below. Now, irritatingly for me, in that audio drama the narrator pronounces it LUETIN, but I'm choosing to willfully ignore that for now and forever. I'm betting it's just his own pronunciation, as I'm not about to start saying my own channel name differently after 10 years. The LUETIN Necropolis is also mentioned in Space Wolves Codex 2nd and 5th editions. There's a very small reference which is given there. So I have extracted the minimal information that I can from this 25-minute audio drama, which very vaguely describes the city and its population. There is no information about the wider planet, its system. All we learn is that it's a mining world. It has some influence from the Imperial cult, which is normal for any hive city. A parliament is mentioned, however I interpret this as more like the ancient French judicial court parliament, not a modern political parliament. And that is about all the information that we have to go on. The biggest piece of information that we have to base the narrative on is the planet's title of being a necropolis, which unfortunately within the 40k verse is not well explained or even really explained at all despite much searching. A necropolis comes from the Greek word meaning city of the dead. A modern necropolis is essentially a vast cemetery or tomb complex, often with elaborate monuments and so on to pay respect to the dead. For example, the pyramids in Egypt are actually also referred to as the Giza necropolis. I think you could also reasonably use extensive catacombs as an example of what could be considered a necropolis. One of the best examples might be the catacombs below Paris. The development of these tomb complexes can range from being specifically designed to honour the dead in a grandiose way, or simply to make space for huge numbers of citizens in a big city. In the case of the Paris catacombs, the expansion of the city and problems associated with where to bury the dead contributed to why they ended up being in this labyrinth of catacomb, which contains these vast amounts of bones from the dead. It was originally just a place to store the huge amount of people that they had to deal with, but over time it developed into a mausoleum that people could visit to see the curious stacking of skulls and entire walls of bones. Anyway, the point is that you can create an elaborate rationalization as to why a world could develop into a cemetery or necropolis world. It likely would not happen in a single instance, but develop over a series of events. Now, I decided some months ago that I would begin to develop my own 100% unofficial homebrew lore around the planet and its inhabitants. For me personally, when forging your own fiction, as I think I've spoken about before, it's a greatly enjoyable thing to do, but for me, that comes with some parameters. For example, anything that occurs should exist within what's already reasonable within the world that we understand. This means no crazy inventions of unique, super powerful war machines that can kind of just get around other things that are established. No weird lost Primarchs coming in, nothing that would basically interfere with or contradict, say, existing technology or established timelines of events. It's not an alternate timeline or something in the future, so it's got to sit within the existing timeline and details therein. To that end, I've worked hard to try and blend my fully unofficial lore for the world of the LUETIN Necropolis into and around the existing events and details of the 40k verse, so that it sits there, it makes sense, and it doesn't interfere with too much else that's going on. So today I'll give an overview of the planet, its events and its history. I have omitted a good amount of detail to fit this all in, and if you enjoy this today, these will be expanded on and fleshed out in an ongoing series, but this gives you today the bare bones. I welcome your feedback as always. I would just ask that if you have constructive constructive criticism, please word it as such, and please as always give a reference if you believe something is incorrect. Tell me where, page numbers, so I can look it up. But I don't think that's going to be necessary because this isn't especially complex stuff. Or if you think that there could be something to include that is critically missing, drop that down below as well. But with all that said, this has been a personal project of mine and I feel pretty satisfied with it so far. There are many details that I'm continuing to flesh out, so keep in mind that this is a rough overview and that I'm updating it even as I write this. Beyond this video today, providing people enjoy this first look, I will continue on with other videos describing the events and characters of the planet. So if you think this sounds something you want to see more of, please hit the like so I know to continue on. I'd love to expand into details like the Underhive, other planets in the system, missions into the ruined hives, so on and so on. You get the idea. So to begin with, I'll just explain my thoughts about a necropolis world. Now it seems reasonable to assume that a necropolis world would need to have seen not just a single severe battle, leaving many millions dead, which can be fairly standard for a cemetery world in the Imperium, although it can also range into, say, billions over a campaign. But a necropolis to me should have other associated events connected to define it separately, or that it was just deemed worthy of having a special tomb complex designed for the honoured dead. So you might consider blending in a mixture of holy events that give it some special significance, and these could then lead to a world being designated initially a cemetery shrine world, and together the combination of the two things can later lead to the designation of a necropolis. That's my reasoning anyhow. It seems pretty logical to me. Essentially, a necropolis is a place which is of a higher significance than a standard cemetery world, and in order to achieve that, there has to be some additional background as to why that is appropriate, or that there was some specific event which happened to warrant its designation as such. So the LUETIN Necropolis is part of the Riva system. It is comprised of 5 planets, 2 feudal, 1 hive mining world, 1 garden and 1 feral. In its early period of M15 to M25, early colonists identified this world as being rich in mineral wealth, and it quickly was colonized into a network of growing habitats. Over the years, these became massive cities which are able to be built thanks to the deep mineral deposits, allowing for easy fabrication. It is established as a major trading hub, and its vast quantities of raw materials are widely traded across the galaxy when they are able to do this. Slowly, the protective machines known as knights become ever more important, as do their emergent ruling class. The planet of LUETIN becomes the most important in the system, yet 3 other worlds hold more basic colonies that over time will also become knight worlds. Over time, the planets in the Riva system collectively form what is known as House Varada, which it has determined will rule the system from the 3rd planet known as LUETIN because of its vast cities. By M25 and M30, the system is kept relatively secure thanks primarily to the stability of House Varada. Its mechanized warrior class has become a necessity during this time thanks to continual raids of alien life seeking to pillage the rich wealth uncovered by the humans. A low quantity of psykers emerge, but as isolation and fear set in, those who are discovered as psykers are quickly purged as they are identified as a high threat to the population. This was fairly standard on many night worlds. The planet weathers the Age of Strife surprisingly well, although during this period 2 proto-hive cities are believed to have been lost. So on the planet of LUETIN originally there were 5 hive cities, but coming out of the Age of Strife this has been reduced to 3, and any trace of those 2 cities has been lost. In M31 the planet comes under Imperial control, and this also covers the period of the Heresy. Now during the period of Heresy, contact with LUETIN had been lost, and Administratum records state that it is believed this system was not deemed tactically a necessary target, and given its contingent of knights that it would be just too much trouble. The traitors likely flagged it for assault at a later date, and the focus for the traitors during the later phase when they were passing through this part of the segmentum was very clearly reaching Terra. So the planet has been brought back under official control by the Imperium by mid-M31. It is assessed at a later date by the newly founded Inquisition for any corruption and is assigned a clear status. But several million executions take place much to the protests of the High Kings, and they're carried out to ensure that it is adequately purged. But around this time the planet's various noble houses have also fractured as a result of distrust and suspicion coming out of the Heresy period, and they now form 3 houses out of the original 1, bearing the name of each of their namesake hive cities: Hive Riva, Falia and LUETIN. The world begins deep mining and resource production again, with each house attempting to compete with the other in mineral production to prove that they are best suited to lead both the planet and the system. The Imperium take note of the unusual situation, but it appears to be initially beneficial, and so they allow the competitive situation between the house nobility of each hive to continue. The Imperium sends along an administrator to act as an official ombudsman to adjudicate if decisions affecting the entire system cannot be agreed between the 3 noble houses. By this central period of M32, the Imperium has installed a new governor to manage the system. This unsettles and makes a great many of the nobles between the three houses unhappy. They have been used to operating within their feudal knight system of governance, but it is exactly this and the fractions between the houses that have caused disruption in the mining process and meeting their imperial tithes. This is finally brought to the attention of the High Lords of Terror when a massive explosion occurs on a forge world which had received a mineral shipment from LUETIN. The tech priests conclude this occurred because of contaminated materials, undoubtedly placed there by one of their rival noble houses in an attempt to bring them into disrepute. The High Lords immediately issue an edict removing the hereditary system on the planet, and to set an example of the power of the Imperium, the High Kings of all three houses are executed, much to the extreme outrage of all three noble houses. There is a period of instability within each of the Hive cities, but the Imperium will not tolerate this kind of infighting, having just survived the heresy. A new governor from Terra known as Rene Avavor, a well-known member of the Trade Guild, is assigned to manage the situation on LUETIN and its system. The mining world of LUETIN in early 544 M32 would then be beset simultaneously by warp disturbances and a rampaging fragment from what is presumed to have been an Orc fleet. We know that around this time Orc attack moons were travelling through the galaxy, destroying many human worlds. Many believe that the Orcs themselves were causing localised psychic and warp disturbances, but regardless of what the trigger was, what came next for the planet would be a catastrophe. It is now believed that the Orcs who appeared on LUETIN at this time had likely broken off from some larger force, perhaps in the hopes of gathering up easy scrap for their ongoing warfest. Patrols of Planetary Defense Force begin to report in sighting Orcs across the planet's surface. This news came at an inopportune moment because the communication problems then make it difficult to request reinforcements from the Administratum. Regular channels can no longer be reached and have been becoming exponentially worse. Within 2 weeks of the Orcs' arrival, all communication outside their local system has been lost. Communications between the other planets in the system, which held no strategic value or military resources, remained broken and difficult to convey messages clearly, but were at least possible. Governor Avavor dispatches an emergency ship in an attempt to make contact with the Imperium. It attempts to access warp space and is never heard from again. Subsequent ships try to escape the system, but quickly return to report that they are now simply unable to enter warp space. Whatever had caused the disturbance in the warp had now left them completely isolated. The planet was unable to receive any assistance from the wider Imperium. Continuing PDF reports estimate a sizable Orc raiding group has landed, and Orc rocks continue to fall from the skies for several weeks. One even smashes straight into Hive Reaver, but despite it causing massive damage to the lower structure of the Hive, the Orcs themselves are quickly obliterated by a combined force of regular guard and Imperial Knights. Feeling bolstered by such an early victory, Avavor, having absolutely no military experience whatsoever, decides it best that the experienced guard armies assigned to each Hive will maintain their positions and begin preparing defences. The 3 guard armies will remain at their Hive cities and will not march out to meet the Orcs, who are at this stage a disorganised rabble. Governor Avavor instead decides that the best course of action will be for him to send out 2/3 of the planet's PDF force, who have only the most basic of training. He says that their sheer numbers will be enough to overwhelm the Orcs. This will limit damage to the regular guard and minimise the time and expense of having to retrain his higher quality forces. However, to ensure total victory, the PDF will be led by the first army of regular guardsmen, who consist of veterans. Except that these veterans are veterans in name only, because in reality they are simply older guard who have rarely seen actual combat, having been stationed on this backwater planet for their entire lives. 1 month passes, and PDF losses combined with the First Army are continuing to mount, and to make matters worse, they have very little constructive progress to show for their sacrifice. Within the first week, Governor Avavor and his commanders had lost some 10 million PDF, along with half the First Army. In the aftermath of this shocking slaughter, it became apparent that the Orcs were far better equipped, more enthusiastic, and numbered at least 4 times greater than had been initially reported. An endless stream of poorly trained, weak human fighters with little coordination and little heavy support only fueled and intensified the Orcs' bloodlust. Worryingly, the command centre was receiving scattered reports coming in from frontline survivors and scouts that the Orcs had been sighted building ever larger machines from the scrap wastes around the Hive cities. Most concerning of all, despite it being clear that their numbers had been underestimated, the PDF and guard forces felt that each attack from the Orcs was increasing in both severity and weight of numbers. The PDF frontlines themselves were little more than a mishmash of hastily improved dugouts, often that had been destroyed many times over. Some command centres were not much more than poorly excavated holes in the ground that would often need digging out daily as well as draining. Many trenches were barely complete because of the constant assaults, and time available to work on them was minimal because they were always under constant attack. As the PDF dragged their feet through the clay-like mud that already plastered them before they even reached their designated positions, they regularly observed how holes in the line were guarded by dead PDF troopers who had been propped up to make positions appear manned. This of course made no sense whatsoever, and only further highlighted how little the PDF understood orcs, because they were no more or less likely to attack any part of the line based on whether it was manned or not. The sight of such things only fueled a sinking feeling of doom that all the troops now felt in the pit of their stomach as they would arrive seeing this bleak, pathetic and ruined front line of the planetary defence force. Yet quite unexpectedly over time, the orcs now appeared to slow in the frequency of their attacks, and this emboldens the governor to send out the remaining PDF along with some knights to crush what he assumes must now be a heavily weakened orc force. This is a catastrophic mistake, and they are all but destroyed, leading to a massive orc counter-assault which then consumes Hive Reaver. The governor then flees to the second hive of Falir, expecting the orcs are going to slow down as they cannibalize Hive Reaver. Except this does not happen, and they push forward instead with furious momentum. As Hive Falir is about to fall, the governor again attempts to salvage the situation, but the house nobility will not stand for the disgrace of such a failure and detonate the atomic core of the hive as it is overwhelmed by the orcs. They destroy it along with the entire population, the command staff, the governor, and a significant percentage of the orc force, including most of their mechs. Reeling from this devastating loss of units, the orcs and the war boss launch a new assault on Hive LUETIN, and thankfully partly due to the orcs' diminished quantity of mech, they are able to repel this initial assault on Hive LUETIN. The perimeter defences around the hive are held, and a second period of protracted ground warfare begins, spanning an entire solar year in the system. The orcs by now have lost their momentum, and what had seemed to be an unstoppable warg now appeared to not have enough strength to break through and crush the remaining defences around Hive LUETIN. The Knights of House LUETIN fare little better though than the Guard, and both are being slowly ground down by continuing Xenos assaults. It's only thanks to a newly emerged group of Freeblade Knights headed by a previously unseen SORORITAS knight known as the Undefeated that the Imperials were able to inflict continually substantial casualties upon the orcs while taking themselves minimal losses. The Imperial forces though over the course of the year become all too aware that the orcs now have the material resource of a hive city behind them, and it's only a matter of time before they will begin replacing their mech losses and enter a new period of exponential growth. At which point they would in all likelihood launch a final assault that will consume them all. The remaining 8th, 9th and 10th Guard armies are entangled in a brutal grinding war of attrition with the orcs, and this takes an especially difficult toll upon the Guard and the Hive's citizenry. With the war and its daily losses plain for all to see, none can escape the horror. However, on LUETIN, unlike the world of Krieg, who came to be entirely apathetic to the sacrifice of individual soldiers, seeing them more as tools of the Emperor, the defenders of Hive LUETIN know that they are all that stands between the destruction of the last Hive city and its billions of citizens, having already seen the power of the orcs and that they have consumed 2 Hive cities. This realization, coupled with the uncertainty of just how long this war of attrition would last, brought an uncommon sense of respect for individual soldiers. Commanders would begin to deploy squads with more caution, ensuring that all positions along their sector were well maintained and well equipped, in stark contrast to the earlier period of trench war when the orcs saw the PDF struggle with ramshackle and pathetic excuses for a defensive network. Guard commanders have to adapt their thinking so as to be able to carefully analyse intel and often require on-the-hour updated reports before they will authorise new assignments. This new manner of thinking in regard to individual soldiers is fairly unprecedented within the context of the wider Imperium, but it results out of this specific circumstance of both being put under the pressure of a heavy assault that is causing daily mass casualties, coupled with the isolation of support from the Imperium. The Hive City has to fend for itself, and despite having vast amounts of ordinary citizenry, these have already proven entirely hopeless against the war of attrition being waged on the surface. The Guard and the Knights are all that can save the city, and every man and woman on the line holds value. The Hive City's early Ministerium representatives see this newfound respect for the individual as an opportunity to attach more ceremony to the casualties of war. and in doing so they bring more followers into their chapels. They begin to make a daily ceremony of the dead, who march back to the hive in great sombre processions, now escorted by Ministorum representatives who burn incense, chant scripture, and bless the ground that is walked upon. The Hive City's Guild of Engineers are ordered by the noble house of LUETIN, in collaboration with the highest ranking representative of the Ministorum, to construct within the base of the Hive City a vast mausoleum that will contain the remains of all those who made the ultimate sacrifice in defense of the world. The order is approved partly so as to boost morale among the survivors of the Guard and its citizenry, and partly with genuine respect and admiration for those who have given their lives. This combination of events will have significant consequences for the later development of both the planet and Hive City's role within the Imperium. A significant event occurs when the High King of House LUETIN, the current ruler of the planet and system, is killed in an attempt to break the deadlock and take the fight to the orcs themselves. Poor intel leads the knights into what will become an appalling slaughter, and the king as well as several of the exalted court are brutally torn apart by rampaging orc mechs. This leaves the noble house of the Hive City in complete disarray, and the outlook for them surviving the coming onslaught is abysmal. The house decide against their better judgment that the only course of action is to amalgamate the Free Blades into their own and install the most capable leader that exists on the planet currently of Gabriel Brasov, leader of the Free Blade Knights. After a long discussion with one of the few remaining barons, he grudgingly agrees, convinced that he has been sent here by the Emperor in a vision, and that his place here holds more value than just fighting Xenos. Brasov begins his reign by convening a council of knight barons and guard commanders in what will become a permanent military council. The aim was to illustrate that decisions given by former singular commanders had clearly led to nothing but failure and catastrophe. Together, they would develop plans and tactics to defeat any who came against them. They launch a daring plan to inflict maximum damage to the orcs by killing their war boss. It's a plan that few believe will succeed, but it is their best option for now. They send out a specially selected team of Imperial Guard to complete the mission. Only half the squad return, broken and exhausted, but much to the considerable surprise of all, they had somehow been successful. The Orc war boss had been killed. Captain Tain Raval, leader of the squad, is dragged back across the lines. His team report that he has somehow survived a direct battle with the war boss and killed the giant orc by his own hands. The orcs by now are apoplectic at the death of their war boss, and without any leadership they commit all remaining resources against Hive LUETIN in what will be a final, unrelenting, rage-induced and completely incoherent assault. Despite wielding few large mechs and no tactical planning, the orcs managed to inflict losses that few in the Imperial Command had considered them capable of. Millions upon millions of guardsmen lie dead, not to mention the billions lost to this point in the destruction of the two Hive cities of Riva and Falir. But despite taking appalling losses, the Imperial forces have emerged as the victors. The orcs are all but annihilated, but few among the surviving Imperials have cause for celebration, considering an utterly dismal conclusion of a harrowing Pyrrhic victory. Tain Raval, the captain who killed the Orc war boss, emerges as a figure during this time who is seen to have led yet another miraculous assault against the Orcs. Many guardsmen present that day would later speak of how they had seen Tain surrounded by a golden aura as he charged into the Orc masses, shielded from harm literally by the love of the Emperor. However, they were quite comfortable to omit the fact that he was in fact badly wounded as a result of his aggressive charge. Events surrounding Captain Tain, now Major Tain, have become known by the entire population. This is almost immediately capitalised by members of the Hive chapels who are attended by devotees of what is at this time the early and strengthening ecclesiarchy. The promoted Major Tain Raval is blessed by the Ministorum publicly within the Hive, and in an overly grandiose ceremony is declared by the Deacon a saint of the Imperium, pending further approval from the Ministorum proper once they emerge from the warp storms and can contact administrative bodies again. The Ministorum within the city continue to leverage growing support against the House Nobility and Engineering Guild to enable them in their mission to expand their construction of ecclesiarchy complexes, chapels, shrines, and even cathedrals. They also dispatch missionary teams to other worlds in the Riva system. The agri-worlds are won over in a short space of time, and the Fira worlds become an ongoing challenge for the ecclesiarchy, but it also becomes a rite of passage for many of the preachers and would-be missionaries, crusaders, redemptionists, and confessors. Some years later, the planet and system emerge from the isolation of the warp storms and rejoin the Imperium. The Imperium sends an assessment team to discover what has happened and are both appalled and impressed by how the situation on the Luetin mining world has been handled. The ecclesiarchy representatives are most excited by the prospect of a saint and divine intervention having occurred. Within a few months, the deacon would be promoted to archdeacon, and the Imperial Administratum, in cooperation with the ecclesiarchy, would redesignate the planet now as primarily an Imperial shrine world. Transports begin to regularly enter the system and flood the city streets with pilgrims and followers of the Imperial cult. Later, as a cardinal of the ecclesiarchy travels to the planet to officially enact the world's transition to a shrine world, as well as meeting Saint Tain Raval, an assassination attempt is made. Tain Raval saves the cardinal, sacrificing himself in the process, and his death sends shockwaves through the hive population on the news that their beloved saint has died. This event is also greatly embarrassing for both the House of Luetin and the ecclesiarchy to have not prevented both the infiltration of such a dangerous enemy cell of operatives and its subsequent consequences. The surviving cardinal orders that a tomb complex to be constructed, positioned within the lower third hive of the city, so as to enable citizens of any status to pass through and view him, as he will lie within his personal mausoleum for all time. The ecclesiarchy, not just on the planet itself but in the wider Ministorum, are deeply disturbed by both the assault upon a cardinal and the appalling and unforgivable loss of an imperial saint. It cannot be ignored that Tain Raval died saving the cardinal. This act would give them a way to negotiate the awkward and embarrassing failure to protect a valuable figure for the ecclesiarchy at this time. Tain Raval was already known as a saint who came to the aid of his brothers and his Imperium in its most dire hour of need. His sacrifice in saving the cardinal fitted well within his character, and the ecclesiarchy would decide that the best way to recover from the appalling damage done is to turn the situation from one of tragedy to further proof that the shrine world of Luetin was directly touched by the will of the Emperor. They propose that because this planet has suffered so much with its loss of billions of Imperial citizens, its guard ground down to minimal capability, and yet its citizenry honoured their dead. They respected each individual human life and built a vast mausoleum to honour them and to honour the Emperor. They kept their faith and they used it to overcome extraordinary suffering. They worshipped the God Emperor with unquestioning devotion. The Emperor himself singled out this hive city to survive of those on the planet. He chose one man, Tain Raval, to be his champion to slaughter the Xenos, to deny their assault upon the hive, and to finally sacrifice himself in defense of the ecclesiarchy itself. The High Priest of the ecclesiarchy on Terra spent many weeks discussing these details with the Arch-Cardinal and Cardinals, interpreting Holy Scripture and attempting to come to a conclusion on how they would proceed. They eventually came to a unanimous decision. The supreme sacrifice of Imperial Saint Major Tain Raval would be honoured by his permanent interment within the tomb complex on the shrine world of Luetin. Furthermore, this world had demonstrated repeated interventions, guidance and blessing by the God Emperor of Man. The supreme human sacrifice on this world, coupled with all these factors, made it clear that this world had met all their requirements to be designated as a necropolis world. A highly sacred tomb complex that held high significance for the ecclesiarchy and its followers. It would become a permanent site of pilgrimage for the followers of the Imperial cult, and the Hive City itself should be expanded and become a monument to the Emperor and a bastion against his enemies. A delegation of Ministorum representatives would be sent immediately to the planet to confirm the world's second redesignation within a year and clear with the High King, who had always shown a great deal of loyalty and devotion to the ecclesiarchy, the expansion of the Hive City and what will become continual redevelopment and reinforcement of the defences both on the Hive itself and its surrounding wasteland. In the coming millennia, thanks to the support of the ecclesiarchy, the Hive City increases in size by as much as 1/3. The population increases dramatically as pilgrims flock to live within the ever-expanding city and its vast cathedral complexes. Mining operations continue and meet Imperial tithes, but its operations are interwoven with the activities of the Ministorum. The tomb of Saint Raval becomes an important site of pilgrimage for worshippers of the Imperial cult, most notably from Terra itself, and by M36 this would include regular attendance by the Adepta Sororitas. The LUETIN Necropolis would become one of many worlds the sisters can attend during their life of spiritual devotion to the Emperor. In Millennium 40, a Sororitas named Sister Alucia was the youngest member of a group of sisters making a pilgrimage to the LUETIN Necropolis so as to visit the tomb of the Imperial Saint Major Tain Raval. While passing through the tomb chamber of Tain Raval, she is overcome by holy visions of the Emperor and was so overcome by the strength of visions that she collapses unconscious. She remains in this coma for over a week, attended to by her sisters, who are accommodated by the Ministorum. She seemingly recovers and the sisters leave the planet to attend reports of a warp incursion in a neighbouring system. They are to rendezvous with an Inquisitor there before descending to the planet and investigating the reports. They discover a burgeoning but powerful cult in the depths of a hive city and face a demon spawn which brutally kills the Inquisitor as well as several of the sisters. Sister Alucia, being inexperienced, is overcome with rage and attempts a fearless charge, but the demon easily tosses her aside, seemingly shattering her body, which slumps to the floor like a ragdoll. Her remaining sisters are already enraged by the demon's audacity and will be about to lead a final charge of fire and blade when suddenly they see a light filtering around the demon. They're speechless when they circle around and see to their astonishment that Sister Alucia is hovering above the ground, bathed in golden light. Her eyes are balls of white lightning and her arms outstretched. Her hair thrashes around her head and her whole body has become a pure tempest of psychic energy. She channels pure warp power and is able to banish the demon, but again slumps to the floor, unconscious but alive. They return to their convent where, after months of deliberation and assessment, Alucia is declared to have been chosen by the Emperor and that he has channeled his powerful spirit through her. This has transformed both her life force and her psychic abilities, and she is now heralded as a living saint of the Imperium. Alucia attributes her transformation to the overwhelming spiritual experience she had in the presence of Tain Raval back on the LUETIN Necropolis. They return to the world to enter a period of spiritual isolation and will emerge many months later after their period of secluded study and quiet purification to discuss with the Ministorum the establishment of a minor order of the sisterhood here within the LUETIN Necropolis. Their primary focus will be in the protection of the tomb and the remains of Tain Raval, who they believe must still have some important role in the eyes of the Emperor. In fact, they even believe it's possible he could still be resurrected. The presence on the LUETIN Necropolis of living Saint Alucia creates a massive new focus of attention from the citizens, nobility and other sororitas. The Ministorum immediately redirects significant resources to the LUETIN Necropolis and many new cathedrals begin to be developed. Additionally, they would found new headquarters for further Ministorum forces central to this new initiative, and there is to be founded a second scholar progenium exclusively for the training of battle sisters and is aptly named Saint Alucias. Within the modern era of the Imperium, various events occur, most importantly an incursion by the Dark Eldar which bypasses the extensive new network of defences which has been constructed around the city. This leads to brutal street fighting, and the city is only saved thanks to the passing ambush carried out by Space Wolf Lord Eric Morkai. Now this is really the only official description of the LUETIN Necropolis, and from this scant information I've had to build everything around it. Now the Space Wolves' defense of the planet helped me somewhat determine the position of the LUETIN Necropolis and the system, but honestly it's complete guesswork. The Dark Eldar can really appear anywhere, so their emergence here is of not much help. Their cabal is not specifically noted as being in any specific area at any specific period, and there are no other details that help direct us to where it could be located. But if we consider that Eric Morkai's company, which is known as the Sons of Morkai, contains specifically a great many wolf scouts, and there is again very little information about them beyond this, but I felt it's reasonable to assume that if his company contains many scouts, then they're more likely to stay in and around the region of Fenris, and not off in the wilds of the galaxy. That's obviously not set in stone, but this was my thinking. I feel like it's a reasonable assumption. Or you could say that they've just been departing Fenris en route to somewhere else. Perhaps they were patrolling a region of the galaxy, picked up some distress call. Again, suspend your disbelief. Now, I originally was going to have the orcs who arrive on the world be a fragment of the assault on Armageddon, but to make the timelines sit more appropriately, I decided that this needed to be earlier. So things become problematic for the world around the middle of M32. This is when the War of the Beast is beginning and orc incursions are happening throughout the galaxy, affecting worlds all across the Imperium, which I felt made more sense. The difference is that the mining world of LUETIN and its Reaver system end up becoming isolated, and then they have to deal with this on their own. They don't have the support of Space Marines or other guard or whatever. But I had to decide somewhere to place the system, and I spent a solid amount of time thinking about it and trying to rationalize a location. And this seemed about as good a location as any, on the border between Segmentum Solar and Segmentum Obscurus, so that's where I decided it would be. To be honest, there are a great many worlds and systems within the Imperium, and their specific location can often be pretty vague at best. In fact, if you look at the galactic charts from say 2nd edition to 8th edition, you'll be amazed at how much some of the planet's locations move around and are pretty unspecific. And I think it's basically because so long as it's roughly in the right area, nobody's doing stellar cartography at Games Workshop to that specific scientific degree. Another reason I chose this area is I wanted the planet to be a site of pilgrimage, considering its development into a necropolis, which is all tied in with its religious imperial cult associations, and so I didn't want it to be say on the peripheral edges of the Imperium. Now, I wish I could rationalise the location more specifically, but there's just so little information, it could be realistically anywhere. The last addition to the Reaver system in the LUETIN Necropolis in late M41 is the arrival of a Primaris fleet chapter titled the Void Guardians. They're established as part of the Ultima founding and are assigned to patrol along the north of Segmentum Solar, bordering Segmentum Obscurus. Now, I am still working on the details of the chapter, but the basic premise is that they were originally a force known for following the stringent rules of the Codex Astartes as laid down by the Primarch Robert Guilliman, and they follow this to an extreme degree. They are an Ultramarine successor, and since their founding, their interactions in and around the system of Reaver and the LUETIN Necropolis, as well as having dealings with its noble house of knights who have assisted them in several major battles, have twisted the Primaris views of the Codex Astartes, which were already fairly extreme to begin with. Now, they are strictly a loyalist chapter, but they now have begun to slide toward the more fanatical end of the zealous followers of the Emperor. They lean more in line with a redemptionist view, and they have become brutally unforgiving, and when they are present on Imperial worlds, anything other than the most marginal of infractions to both Imperial and Ministerial order leads to a death sentence. As time goes by, their relationship with the LUETIN Necropolis builds, and at this point their chapter master decides that they will be renamed as the Necropolis Guardians. Because of their belief, the Guardians are extremely intolerant of both the Xenos and even more so the Heretic. And you might say, well, surely all Astartes are fairly intolerant of Xenos and Heretics. It's true, except that with Xenos, some Astartes have definitely been known to broker agreements or temporary truces to work with, say, Eldar or even the Necron. These kind of arrangements are entirely unthinkable to the Guardians, who believe that only the Emperor can lead the path forward and any others only exist to be exterminated. This low tolerance can be partly attributed to their early strict adherence to the Codex Astartes and led to the chapter as a trait following their guidelines to the absolute letter, with no room for dispute or discussion. Where they were previously guided by the Codex, they now manipulate its teachings to justify and exacerbate their own perspectives. The Guardians are greatly feared in the systems neighbouring Reaver and the LUETIN Necropolis. They're known for appearing out of the void for unannounced inspections, and this often involves interrogation of planetary governors, senior overseers, and the nobility. They will regularly randomly select PDF troops and regimental officers, or even plain guardsmen, for what are referred to as faith examinations. This usually involves the selected individual being processed through a variety of mental and physical trials to test both the strength of their belief and their willpower. The Guardians also want to see evidence of a shielding force of faith on the physical self, and these trials are not dissimilar to Astartes trials and often involve severe physical and mental trauma. Consequently, most ordinary humans who are selected for faith examinations do not return, and those who do are usually mentally broken by the process. Some never speak again, others are prone to regular nightmares or gradual loss of sanity. The few who do weather the horror return to their people entirely changed, often believing themselves to be vessels for the Emperor, and will not, unlike the Guardians, become entirely fanatical in their worship of the Emperor. This will then usually radiate into the other citizens or troopers around them, and the Guardians believe that in doing this, they are strengthening the spiritual shield of the Imperial forces in the system. The Necropolis Guardians believe that the will of the Emperor literally flows through them, and that he protects them far beyond their physical armour. Their primary weapon is a juggernaut of unbreakable faith. They learned early on through encounters with the Eldari, and especially heretical humans, that raw brutality could quickly lead to enemies faltering, and so they seek to exploit this. One means of doing so is to engage in close quarter combat as quickly as possible. The Guardians have also developed a disturbing penchant for crushing the skulls of their enemies with their hands, even gouging the eyes to inflict severe mental trauma on enemy combatants. This could potentially have been influenced by their association with extreme sects of the Imperium that they have discovered, including the likes of the Death Cult assassins and redemptionists. These worryingly grisly tendencies are one potential cause that has developed their armour from an originally plain colour to their now bloody-handed armour design. And the rest of this is still being fleshed out. The design of the armour is not set in stone either. I want to try a few different versions. This will obviously be expanded with specific characters for the homebrew Primaris chapter, as well as events that lead to individuals becoming integral to the chapter or banished from it, getting into the chapter master, etc, etc. So this is my overview of the LUETIN Necropolis. A reminder that this is all 100% unofficial. It is my own imagined events that I just wanted to fit together for fun, for entertainment, for my own enjoyment. It also gives me a really great basis to create some custom Necromunda gangs, although I should probably call it Necropolis now if it's based around that. But I really enjoy Necromunda the tabletop game, and I've actually held off of painting my own Necromunda minis. I have quite a few now, but because I wanted to make these custom gangs that specifically fit within the LUETIN Necropolis hive city. So you can already imagine what's possible here with, say, Sororitas recruits having to endure the horror of the Underhive to prove their worth, gangs of escaped penal workers, mutant horrors who have escaped from Hive Falir, Hive Reaver, nests of orcs that penetrated the service, it goes on and on. Now, not to mention there's a lot of fun things to develop here with this unofficial lore, like a minor order of Sororitas to be on LUETIN Necropolis, the nobility and their power struggles, other figures within the city, curious civilian affairs, guardsmen, traders, all sorts of different stuff, battles. I think it'd be a lot of fun, and something for me to run alongside the other lore videos. Now, the hardest part for me has been pulling together the base foundation of the timeline and other details, but now I feel pretty solid with the narrative, and I think it will be easier to run out specific bits and pieces. Now, I'll also say that while here and there I could throw out a big video related to this, I guess like today, I think it'd be more interesting for this to form the basis of an ongoing series. And so I think it makes sense to keep the video length down in future videos to something like 15 or 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, so that it's something that I can handle producing in a genuine ongoing basis, not just like 2 episodes a year, which I think could be difficult to follow and not so enjoyable. Lastly, I will just say if you have a constructive criticism, as I said in the beginning, please feel free to give it. I'm not really looking for huge essays that are going to create big chunks of story, because like I say, I've got it kind of worked out. But if you do feel inspired and it's something you want to include in the narrative, like maybe a custom gang for the Underhive or whatever, if I want to use it, I'll respond to your comment and ask your permission. Anyway, that's my final thoughts, and that's the outline for the LUETIN Necropolis. I hope you enjoyed and look forward to your comments as per usual. As I say, if you enjoyed, drop a like, and then I will know to continue this, because the next video I do should be an official beginning to the series. So I will see you guys in the next one.